Welcome everyone to our study of the Bodhisattva Guide, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's commentary on Shantideva's great Mahayana Upadesha, his instruction. And as always, kindly recognizing the relevance of what we're studying here in terms of addressing the root of all the suffering in the world. Of course, there's a lot of sufferings that need to be attended to on various practical levels. But as long as we never get to the root of things, these sufferings that we experience will always just roll on like waves that never end. So with that awareness of the value of this, and very much value not in terms of our private little Buddhist project of some sort, but rather in terms of the larger community of sentient beings everywhere at all times, then following in the footsteps of all the great masters who we have as actual examples, then we're dedicating our entire vision towards the alleviation of suffering universally everywhere. And this is also why we hold our teachers in such esteem and respect. So we're presently studying the chapter of endeavor, where we looked last time at 3 kinds of laziness. We're on the 3rd one, I think. But it's really not understanding really the incredible privilege that we have with our present existence. We tend to allocate our resources and prioritize in the wrong way. And you could say we can't really be blamed, because that's where we're coming from. We're like stuck in a very small place. But from the point of view of those who truly see the nature of reality, then we need to recognize the extraordinary opportunity we have to be born as a human and to presently be able to direct our attention and our efforts towards liberating the cause of suffering. And again, this is not about just us, but about everyone, everywhere. And that's where there's 3 kinds of things that can get in the way. And one is the sort of just being commonly dull. The other one is being overly busy. And then there's the notion of just not being able to, thinking, oh, well, the Buddha is so sublime and all the great sages, they're so incredible. I could never think of myself in these terms. So that's where Shantideva then says, do not be downcast, but marshal all your powers. Make an effort. Be the master of yourself. Practice the equality of self and other. Practice the exchange of self and other. So His Holiness then comments, the 3rd type of laziness arises from underestimating yourself and thinking you will never be able to attain enlightenment. But there's no need to be discouraged in this way. All of us have the potential for Buddhahood. The ultimate nature of mind, though not something tangible, is present in each one of us, even when it is obscured. Because of this, even the tiniest insect can attain enlightenment if it makes the effort. And again, we can apply a lot of analysis with regards to the way that we develop and perpetuate our delusion in terms of misapprehending phenomena, in terms of identifying how phenomena are dependently arisen and as such don't possess any intrinsic reality ultimately, even though, yes, there is an appearance, but missing the ultimate point about nature of phenomena. We can, on the basis of analyzing the dependent nature of how everything arises, we can see that there's a misapprehension taking place. And where does that come from? That can only come from one place, and that's the misapprehender. And that's the mind, which is the creator of this. But we can also see how that mind, that confused mind, can be diminished, how it doesn't necessarily have to just continue unchallenged. As soon as there is awareness, this condition of ignorantly labeling phenomena as solid, it begins to weaken. And that's where we can understand analytically the potential of our mind to ultimately not be held by this confusion. But we can also see intuitively that when we encounter somebody who is selfless, and this can we might project it onto just ordinary people, maybe the people at the checkout counter or whatever. We might just be delighted by their selfless sort of attention to us. How are you today? Whatever it might be. We might be in a good mood and think, oh, what a lovely person. But that's actually us appreciating this quality that is not held by toxicity. And specifically, it plays out when we encounter persons of great wisdom and compassion. So that's where we look towards people like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or other great teachers who appear within our horizons. And that's where we look at them and we see qualities that we recognize, that we admire, that we wish to emulate. And this is then that which prompts us to see that there is a potential. And it's not just that we analyze it or sort of intellectually assess, oh, that's a very accomplished person, but it touches us deeply. And that's where there's a place within us that almost is like, sort of crying out, yes, that's what we need. That's what we need. That's what I need. That's sort of, and that's also why we gravitate towards such people. Of course, the point is not really just hanging around people like that, objectifying them or getting the sort of high from the contact, but it's about us inside ourselves. There's a dimension that is not confused and that resonates with such. And that's where we understand this ultimate nature of mind is not something that's just something that took place in the life of some extraordinary individuals, but it's our basic ground. And that's where His Holiness then says, even the tiniest insect can attain enlightenment if it makes the effort. If the tiniest insect has the conditions, it possesses exactly the same potential as us. And that's also why you have stories of great sages who honor even insects. Many of my teachers, they go through incredible pains to actually make sure that the insects are going to be okay, and really caring about others in general is really the hallmark of a great sage, but also not just out of, you could say, compassion for their confused condition, but also out of deep respect, honoring the purity that's present within any insect and also the most despicable human that we might be able to conceive of. And that's where we recognize that this condition of enlightenment is not just something far away and other. So this, of course, applies to us. And that's where Shantideva says, oh, but how could I become enlightened? And then speaking back to that objection, Shantideva answers himself. Don't excuse yourself with such despondency. The Buddha who declares the truth has truly spoken and proclaimed. Then if they bring forth strength of perseverance, even bees and flies, and gnats and grubs will gain supreme enlightenment so hard to find. And if by birth and lineage of humankind, I am able to distinguish good from ill and do not leave the Bodhisattva deeds, why should I not attain the state of Buddhahood? So, so we shouldn't allow ourselves to perpetuate that narrative, saying, me, how could I become enlightened? And it's very hypocritical, actually, because there's a big ego that sort of is out there and sort of wanting things according to ego's particular demands. And the ego would like to be the most important. But actually, when the spotlight is on, then there's like shrinking away, saying, oh, me, no, I could never. So the potential is there in us, in all beings. And also, the thing is, right now, we have rebirth in what we call the higher realms. There's an important point to be made about the higher realms. It's also Rinpoche, I remember mentioning this, and it's probably repeated many places in the scriptures. What defines the higher realms is that awareness that what we do has an impact for what comes. We have an awareness intuitively of cause and effect. So we're aware that what we do is going to affect us. And that's what defines the higher realms. The lower realms, we're just constantly bashing around without any awareness of what we do, actually what the effect has. And so bashing around, then there's simply no thought of what might come out of it. Whereas what defines the higher realms is this this discerning, that understands that some things are going to make us happy and some things are going to make us suffer. And so when we have this present condition, and even on top of that, not just being aware of, you could say, the ethical impulse to distinguish good from ill, but also the awareness of the potential for enlightenment. So if we embrace the Bodhisattva deeds, there's no reason we shouldn't attain awakening. So His Holiness says we should also not worry that we will never be able to accomplish such difficult Bodhisattva activities as giving away our bodies, possessions, and all our merits. As beginners, we may not be ready for this, so we should start by simply generating the wish to give these things and give them mentally, using the path of means and wisdom. As our practice becomes more powerful, we will arrive at a point where we know that it is appropriate to give away our bodies, and we will actually be able to do so without any physical or mental suffering. So, of course, here we're talking about being very practical, beginning where we are. And then we might think, well, the nth degree, that thing of, doing like the Bodhisattva who gives away his body to the hungry tigress, that's impossible. But then, actually, if we look in the world, there are people who give themselves for others, even ordinary people. Parents would give themselves for their children. People give away their kidneys because they'd want to care for somebody else, even that diminishes their chances, etc., etc. So there is continually this impetus. There is this tendency towards simply just seeing others and others' lives as more important than us and our others. So we shouldn't even think that that is the example of the Buddha is that extreme either. So Shantideva then says, merit is the true cause of the body's ease, while happiness of mind is had through understanding. What can sadden those who have compassion, who remain within samsara for the sake of beings? Mounted on the horse of bodhicitta, which puts to flight all mournful weariness, what lucid person could be in despair, proceeding in this way from joy to joy? The point is, there's absolutely nothing to be lost by bodhicitta. Everything is there to be won. And we would say the body's ease, having presently all the conditions on the basis of merit, not just good karma, but really on that which connects us with the path of bodhicitta. There's presently having the rebirth of being a human, the precious human rebirth. There's that. And then also there's the view, the understanding of the nature of emptiness, the understanding of wisdom and compassion. And so why would anybody ever mind doing that which actually brings happiness, namely being there for others? There's no concern about samsara. There's no concern about suffering. Samsara is the state of mind. The notion of being there for others can never, ever be a painful place. And so that's where someone who's practicing this path goes from joy to joy. We might look at them and think, oh my God, they're having such a tough time. Like we look at the life of Milarepa, or we look at the life of some of the great sages who, yes, their circumstances weren't particularly cushy, and yet they couldn't care less. And in fact, they might even have embraced that simplicity of lifestyle because they knew that was really, that their joy had absolutely nothing to do with the external circumstances. So there's a path which is entirely about freedom from suffering, weariness, and so on, a path of proceeding from joy to joy. So this, of course, is something that you could say the whole Buddhist teaching vibrates with that message. And then quoting Nagarjuna, His Holiness Dalai Lama says, it is said in the Garland of Jewels that it is necessary to accumulate infinite merits for innumerable kalpas in order to accomplish Buddhahood. Let us not be dismayed by this, thinking, how could I ever accumulate so much merit? Instead, let us make the wish to lead infinite beings to the infinite qualities of Buddhahood by carrying out the infinite activities of the Bodhisattvas over an infinite period of time. So at that point, we're not really concerned about whether are we going to get there, are we there yet, that sort of thing. It's more about just the nature of the path, in that it is one that proceeds from joy to joy. There's not really any hurry. The Bodhisattva actually becomes enlightenment from not really wanting enlightenment or not really caring about enlightenment. That's actually the cognitive obscuration that thinks, I want enlightenment. That's the finest delusion. Of course, that we need to have all the way. And Tsongkhapa Rinpoche is often quoting, I can't remember if it's Shantideva, it might also be Vasubandhu, but either way, then there's this saying that why we should abandon all delusion. We should have that one delusion to think, I must attain Buddhahood. But when the Bodhisattva arrives at the final stages of the Bodhisattva path, then it's actually the relinquishing of that complete wish for something other that might happen in the future, that the abandoning of my intention of wanting enlightenment for me, the complete falling away of that, which precipitates then perfect enlightenment. And so that the degree as we progress on the path, the sort of the worry about may I get there one day falls away. I remember actually studying with he was a student. It was a very good Danish Swami, Janakananda Saraswati. He was a student of Satyananda, Paramahansa Satyananda. And he told this story once of these two Indian sages. And there was one sage who was very seriously sitting and meditating. And he'd been sitting there for many years. And so ants had built a whole sort of anthill around him. And he was just sitting there very seriously meditating while he was his head sort of stuck up right up above the anthill. And then so he was sitting there very seriously practicing. And then there was another yogi, a bhakti yogi, who came sort of skipping and hopping along the road, probably playing his flute or cymbals or whatever, and pray in praise of God. And he saw the yogi sitting there and sort of stopped over and said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm practicing the path for perfect liberation." And the bhakti person said, "Oh, me too." And they had some discussion, and finally they decided to call on God and say, "Who's going to get liberated first?" And so then God appeared in the sky, and they say, "So who's going to be liberated first? When will I be liberated?" The guy in the anthill said. And God said, "You'll be liberated in 4 lifetimes." And the guy in the anthill said, "Oh, really? 4 more lifetimes?" And then the dancing bhakti guy was asking, "When do I get liberated?" And he says, and God said, "You'll be liberated in 1,000 lifetimes." And the bhakti guy went, "Yay!" And then there was a voice from the sky that said, "You are free." See, that's the point that we're making here, really, is that the infinitude of the path shouldn't really be something that it ever sort of causes you could say, us thinking, "Oh gosh, it's a long slog." But if we think about it, the degree to which we are attached to the self, then it certainly, in my own case, I think that's an optimistic estimate. So that's where we appreciate really the path and are not really driven by ambition. Anyway, what really makes the Bodhisattva tick is that intention of bodhicitta. So that's where it says, with a single instant of such intention, having these 4 infinite characteristics, we can accumulate merit very easily. So let us not be influenced by the laziness of being discouraged. Oh, gosh, what was it for? Anybody got that? There's probably 4 enumerated here. The body, the mind, the bodhicitta, the joy, possibly something like that. Okay, remind me to. There's probably a commentary that I'll try and look in the commentaries what those 4 are. Okay. Sorry, I overlooked that when preparing for today's lesson. Okay, 31. The forces that secure the good of beings are And as aspirations, steadfastness, relinquishment, and joy. That might actually be it. Okay. Okay. Does that? Let's see here. There's a single instant of such intention, having these four infinite characters. Okay, they're coming up. So here they are. The forces that secure the good of beings are aspiration, steadfastness, relinquishment, and joy. Aspiration grows through fear of suffering. Fair enough. And contemplation of the benefits to be attained. Okay. So His Holiness says, to generate endeavor, we need four supports: aspiration, steadfastness, relinquishment, and joy. Aspiration is developed by reflecting on karma, on cause and effect. As you know, a good or bad result comes from a positive action and a bad result from a negative action. So to attain the state of Buddha, who is free of all defects and endowed with all good qualities, it will be necessary to accumulate infinite merit and purify infinite obscurations over a period of many kalpas. Think how little inclined you are in this short life to do positive action and to purify your obscuration. You should spur yourself to make an effort. So that's again where we need to simply revise our outlook if we don't already have this aspiration. And that's where then Shantideva says, but if my acts are good, sincerely intended, then no matter where I turn my steps, the merit gain will honor me with its resulting benefits. But if, through seeking happiness, my deeds are wrong, no matter where I turn my steps, the knives of misery will cut me down, the wage and retribution of a sinful life. Through virtue, I will rest within the cool heart of a fragrant spreading lotus, with splendor nurtured by the sweet words of the conqueror. Then from the lotus opened in the sage's light, in supreme form I will arise to dwell the blissful Buddha's air in presence of victorious ones. So it's important as modern people to not be caught up by a very sort of, you could say, pervasive discourse that very much is sort of down on the whole idea that what we do actually makes a difference in the sense of what we do with the mind, and the whole idea with vice and virtue and negative actions, positive actions, where we very often have this sort of, you could say, arrogance about the notion of virtue. There's a sort of a style of thinking that sort of goes along the lines of, well, that's sort of goody two shoes, Annie Green Gables, that sort of thing. People who are just sort of focusing on virtue, they're probably, you know, not the kind of persons I'd like to hang out with. What is it again? I can't remember. It was Bertrand Russell or Nietzsche or somebody who said, I'd rather go to hell. Interesting people are there, you know. And that sort of rather smart-ass attitude really overlooks the actual reality of this. And that's where we need to look beyond the words and actually understand really what we're talking about here in terms of actual actions. So this here is, if you like, serious discussion about our actions and the fact that merit is actually something that brings about genuine happiness. And the thing is, the ordinary ignorance that doesn't really understand, and that's lacking in a, you could say, popular discourse very often, is a clear understanding that the pursuit of happiness is entirely contingent on actually being very discerning with regards to our actions, with our body and speech for sure, but also with our mind. And without that clear discerning, then yes, as much as we want happiness and we grab it and look for it and to put all sorts of stops in place and use all sorts of money and whatnot, this won't bring us happiness. Literally, the knives of misery will be cutting us down. And here then the term, the wage and retribution of a sinful life, doesn't come from some external entity that judges us. It's not like we're supposed to be good boys and girls because somebody else is looking and they're judging us, but it's just the nature of cause and effect. And that's where particular actions, if they're not guided by insight on what is positive, what's negative, yes, then there's results. So it's about same like if we invest money, you want to go to somebody who's a discerning venture capitalist who can actually give us advice on what works and what doesn't work. So similarly, also here we're getting the expert advice from Shantideva, and he would, just like banks, they would also say, if you invest wisely, there's going to be some, you could look at a comfortable retirement and what have you. Then likewise, yes, there are results of these particular actions in terms of our increased freedom, being heirs to the Buddha and so forth. So this is really just very straightforward, but particularly as modern persons, we need to sort of be a little bit alert about our reaction to some of the wordings of this. The words, we might object to the words like sin. We might react to words like, or the notion of sort of like some sort of a overly rosy promise that sounds like salesmanship and so on, and just really see we're just talking facts. We're just talking obvious facts, obvious results of actions. So the Sutra of the Vajrayana speaks about firmness or self-confidence in these terms. When the sun rises, it shines over the whole world, regardless of people's blindness or mountain shadows. Likewise, when a Bodhisattva manifests for this amount of others, he or she, regardless of their obstacles. So the sun doesn't choose to shine some places or another. It's there. There might be some people who can't see it. It might not penetrate everything. Similarly, also the Bodhisattva's activity. So Shantideva says, let me first consider my reserves, to start or not to start accordingly. It might be better not to start, but once begun, I should not then withdraw. That's why I can't remember if it's Suzuki Roshi or Trungpa Rinpoche who says, if you have to do it, you're going to have to follow through. If you get on the train, it's going to be difficult to get off later on. So, think well before you actually start. So, His Holiness comments, before you do anything, we should always ask ourselves whether we will be able to do it properly and complete it. If the answer is no, we should not start. Leaving tasks uncompleted creates a habit for the future. So once we have begun something, we should be sure not to go back on our decision. Okay, now the implication here is we have already started. So that's where us here presently in this class, we belong to a group that's already on the train. So, but that's where it applies, this thing, and this is a sort of an ethos that's common both in Asia and also in the Western world, where you want to complete a task. Otherwise, it becomes difficult in the future to complete other tasks. I think some of you probably read or familiar with the story of Matthew Ricard, who went to study with a great teacher in India, Kangyur Rinpoche. And Matthew was, a very, you could say, destined student in every way. But Kangyur Rinpoche insisted that he go back and finish his PhD. So, so Matthew would come he would annually for several years, then come and visit Kangyur Rinpoche and study with him, but then go back and work on his degree. Kangyur Rinpoche wouldn't let him come out and start studying the Dharma until he had finished what he had set out to do. Then once he came here, once he started studying with Kangyur Rinpoche and other teachers, then things worked out very well. So here then, His Holiness comments, self-confidence is not to be confused with pride. Pride is thinking highly of oneself without good reason. Self-confidence is knowing that one has the ability to do something properly and being determined not to give up Also, self-confidence comes without self-consciousness. So there's not the sort of looking and out of insecurity saying, yeah, I'm good compared to the others. There's not that self-consciousness. Genuine self-confidence is that sort of unconditional pride that doesn't compare and is simply just at ease. So, His Holiness then comments, ordinary beings are prepared to make a good deal of effort for relatively insignificant ends. We are promised to work for the immensely more important goal of liberating all beings. So we should cultivate great self-confidence, thinking, even if I'm the only one to do so, I will benefit all beings. So without looking at the others doing it, am I supposed to be the good person, but they're not? That's that sort of thing. So that's where it has to be something that's entirely about us, not looking to others and just having that integrity, that confidence. This is what we're going to do, regardless what else is going on. Shantideva says, overpowered by their mind's afflictions, worldly folk are helpless to secure their happiness. Compared with those who wander, I am able. This, therefore, shall be my task. When they find a dying serpent, even crows behave like soaring eagles. Therefore, I'm weak. And if I'm weak and feeble-hearted, even little faults will strike and injure me. But if depressed, I give up trying, how can I gain freedom from my abject state? But if I stand my ground with proud resolve, it will be hard for even great faults to attack me. So we might look at other people and say, well, they're creating misery for other people. Well, that's predictable because yes, they're helpless. They do not possess the conditions for actually proper understanding where happiness comes from. So when we look at others and see that they're perpetuating misery, it's predictable. We should of course be proactive in assisting them and do what's necessary, but we should also understand them. However, we presently have actually an awareness of what brings about genuine happiness. So we shouldn't just sort of gloat if some things come our way, and then be disheartened if things don't come our way. This image of we would say the Garuda. The Garuda swoops down and picks up even the most poisonous snake and flies off with it. And that happens. Actually, a friend of mine just here the other day was saying that she had seen this bird of some sort of bird of prey that actually carried off a snake. But that actually happens, and particularly then in Asia, we talk about the Garuda actually able to take care of the poisonous snakes. But there's a little bit of there's a little bit of comedy then when a crow sort of picks up a dead snake and walks around pretending it's a Garuda. And we sometimes use this image when we talk about if we begin to voice the great logicians like Nagarjuna and sort of become proud of our own philosophical position on the basis of essentially just parroting and mouthing you could say the clarity of the great logicians like Nagarjuna, and sort of pretend that we're smart. Actually, we're just doing what they've already done. The snake is already dead, and we're just sort of prancing around pretending that we done it. Anyway, that's where we make ourselves very vulnerable. And so it's important that we have to have this resolve that is not in any way sort of conditioned by ordinary pride and succeeding or not succeeding. So if we have that firm resolve, then it's, as it says here, it's difficult for us to be overcome by faults. So His Holiness says, our resolution, however, should not involve ordinary pride, which is a negative emotion. On the contrary, we should be self-confident with regard to the negative emotions, determined not to be overcome by them. So that's where we meet negative emotions very much with, you could say, the dignity, but also the discerning that enables us to deal with them clearly, not as just suppressing them or sweeping them away or forgetting them, but actually clearly meeting them and applying the necessary antidotes. And so that's where we, on the basis of doing that, then there's a confidence that we can handle this. So that's what we need to develop, that kind of confidence. And in the Vajrayana, there's a little bit speak of something that's called Vajra pride, which is similar, also some degree of just a confidence in a condition that's not, you could say, contaminated by confusion and duality. So Shantideva says, I will be victor over all, and nothing shall prevail and bring me down. The offspring of the lion, the conqueror, should constantly abide in this self-confidence. So we are the offspring of the great, what we call the lion among humans, the Buddha. We are the heirs, and not just in sort of a purely metaphorical way, because we actually could say that we possess the DNA of enlightenment, in that we have exactly that. Just like we have sort of traits, as some of us get older, we begin to our sort of dismay, we might see that we are surprisingly similar to our parents. And that's where we sort of go, well, yes, there is that DNA happening. And that's sort of just a fact, really. We could say we have that sort of traits, and that happens. But the thing is, more than any trait which is karmic, and sort of, you could say, the physical DNA that I'm talking about, is very different from what we're talking about here, which goes much deeper, which is down at the most subtle level, the real sort of ground of our being, and that's the DNA of enlightenment. So when we talk about being the heir of the Buddha, it's not just that we've signed up at the local Buddhist church and now sort of walk around being card-carrying members, but it's more that we actually possess, we are related to the Buddha in the sense that we are ultimately possessing the exact same purity that the Buddha possesses. So that's where we can refer to ourselves as, like it often says, the children of the victors. Gelwe se, the victors, yeah. So children of the jinas, the victorious ones. So His Holiness says, this is the sort of pride we need, the self-confidence that does not accept the domination of the negative emotions and does everything to destroy them. The heroism of the Bodhisattva lies in this use of self-confidence to confront the negative emotions and conquer pride. People with no such self-assurance let themselves be invaded by pride and the other emotions at the slightest provocation. There is nothing heroic about that. Even if it were to cost us our lives, we should never let ourselves be influenced by these emotions. So we're not talking about not having the emotions. That happens. That's our karma. That's normal. But to be influenced, that's up to us. That's where we need to exercise a degree of free will. And that free will and power only comes from the practice of the path. Presently, we're pretty weak, but at the same time, we have the vision and the capacity, and particularly we have the methods. So it's on the basis of the methods then that we can go forth and actually achieve what is our heroic aspiration. It's not just, you could say, it's not pure folly that we should attempt that. And that's, of course, the implication here, that we shouldn't think that, oh no, I could never do this. We can. So Shantideva continues, however great may be their peril, people will, by reflex, guard their eyes. And likewise I, when dangers come, must not fall down beneath defilement's power. So His Holiness says, as regards joy, once we have generated bodhicitta, we should take up the activities of a bodhisattva with joyful delight. The more we practice, the more should be our desire to make further progress. So that's also where we are continually, we possess this, this what we looked at earlier, which is this, in Tibetan it's shishin, and it's very often translated vigilant introspection. I think here was translated as attentiveness, and it's just being aware of what's happening in our mind. Again, this is in a way, we are aware of what's happening in our mind. If somebody asks what you're thinking of, we're aware, we're attentive to what's happening in our mind. But it's so often in our life when we go about things that without noticing it, there's an undertow of negativity that has sort of happened within our mind, and we're simply unconscious of it. And that's where we need an awareness that is attentive to what's going on in our mind. And that's where we should really be like someone guarding their own eyes, then be really aware of the dangers when these defilements, they're present within our mind. That's why we shouldn't fall under their power. So with that, we have that sort of joyful application. It's never a question of us having a problem with ourselves, but it's more just that we have this joy in which we don't give in to that which brings us down. Yeah. So, and since they never have enough of pleasure, honey on the razor's edge, how could they have enough of merit, fruits of which are happiness and peace? So without the sort of the hedonistic project of just self-gratification and so on, thinking that that is going to be, that's going to give us satisfaction, we need to realize that happiness is going to be something that comes on the basis of merit. Shantideva continues, the elephant, tormented by the noonday sun, will dive into the waters of a lake. And likewise, I must plunge into my work that I may bring it to completion. So as you know, in India, in Buddhism a lot, we very often talk about samsara as the place of this affliction, scorched by the heat of the afflictions, where this sort of notion of scorch is sort of compared to the sun. And the path of liberation is compared to the soothing, cool moon. So that's, of course, something that very much draws on the imagery of India. And that's where we have a clear awareness of what an elephant must go through in the noonday sun, incredible heat. Anyway, many of us are increasingly experiencing that sort of phenomena. And that's where we can understand what a relief it is when we're cooled down. And that's similarly also when we're practicing the path, that's exactly the kind of solace that we get, the relief that we get from practicing the path. So His Holiness says, from one life to another, we have always sought happiness, and yet, because we have always been dominated by negative emotions, we have only met with difficulties. Reborn as humans, birds, deer, insects, and so forth, we have never had lasting happiness. There's been nothing to show for all the efforts we have made to be happy and avoid suffering. Now that we have started on the Bodhisattva path, we should practice with joy and not be disheartened by the few difficulties that are bound to occur in the beginning. Our efforts will definitely bear fruit. Moderation is to be applied when, as happens to all of us from time to time, we become physically and mentally exhausted and are unable to continue, however much we try. At such times, we should not force ourselves, but we should stop and rest so that later, whatever we do will be done properly and completely. When we rid ourselves of laziness and gain a sense of enthusiasm through our aspiration, steadfastness, relinquishment, and joy, we should practice endeavor by applying mindfulness and attentiveness. Whether during or between sessions of meditation, we must always keep our minds focused on positive actions. We might be able to meditate on bodhicitta quite well for a short while, but if we're not careful to maintain mindfulness and attentiveness all the time, we risk committing faults and transgressing our vows. So that's where we have now the conditions there for us to practice. But it's important that we continually apply ourselves every micro moment. Or else what happens is, again, this undertow of unawareness draws us back into the habitual perspectives. And that's where we weaken our vows. So that's where here we're not just talking about the sort of the big vows we might have taken in terms of refuge vows or bodhisattva vows or specific vows, but it's really just the whole spirit that very easily gets undermined. And that again leads to us weakening. And that's why it's so important that we continually retake and, you could say, reinstate our commitment. So Jonas says, while we may concentrate on one particular aspect of the path at a time, it's important to have an overall balance between the different aspects. Meditation should progress hand in hand with study, without either one being neglected. Having cleared away doubts intellectually, we should integrate our understanding with the experience of meditation. In this way, our practice will be balanced and complete. So let us, with mindfulness and attentiveness, be careful to repel the attacks of negative emotions, putting an end to these enemies of ours, so as not to slip into wrong activities. Oh, how's the sound? Somebody was saying there was an issue with sound, but it's only one person. Sound is fine. Better now. Okay, good. All right. Glitchy, but mostly good. Okay. Sound is good. Fine. It was brief, I guess, the interruption, but came good. It's okay here, yes. Good. It did happen for a short time. Okay. Any questions about the material? It's fairly straightforward. You're all practitioners, so you know exactly what we're talking about. But also as practitioners, I guess we all humbly recognize but it's not that obvious either, isn't it? We're talking about such a, you could say, something so real. This is kind of what's worth looking into. So nice to be in the company of Shantideva and His Holiness talking about real issues. Not sort of just skirting around with, impossible. Yes.
If there is what was considered a negative occurrence happen, and you're doing your mindful practice, your practice, negating what is in front of you, which is negative, to be mindful of, yes, that's a negative circumstance and how then one responds to it. It's very tricky to get caught into what's presented itself and have a higher view, to see the mind in response to it.
Yeah. So the question is, what should we do when we encounter negative circumstances? Yeah. So the question is, what should we do when we encounter negative circumstances? It's probably difficult to maintain a higher view on things. Yeah, I guess it's a bit like I'm always using this example. If we learn martial arts, it's important that we continually practice, because we can't have got a certificate in martial arts, and then if we don't practice, then when we're being mugged in a back alley, then it won't really help that we have the knowledge. There has to be the practice. And that's why His Holiness here, he's saying it's important for us to sustain this practice at all times. That's where we're lucky. We will have moments when we're not confronted just with negative circumstances. And that's when we need to practice. Then when we encounter negative circumstances, we'll be better prepared. Just like maintaining our sort of practice of martial arts. Can you please repeat the 3 kinds of laziness briefly? Yeah. Well, I forget what they are in Tibetan, but they are basically, the first is just being dull. We traditionally say being fond of sleeping. Yeah. The second is being excessively busy and essentially distracting ourselves with our busyness, where we might very often, in sort of the context of, Protestant work ethic and so forth, we might sort of justify it saying, oh yeah, but I'm being a very, effective person. So that's where we get caught up in busyness, but it's really just a laziness that doesn't really want to deal with what really has to be dealt with. And then finally, there's the one that is this despondency that says, I couldn't possibly, become enlightened. I couldn't possibly pursue following the footsteps of the Bodhisattvas. Yeah. Can you explain the difference between guilt and original sin and bad karma? Yeah, the idea of, first of all, guilt is not very useful. So we need to make sure that we never have the feeling of guilt. That's exactly why in the Buddhist path we have methods for that. That's why we practice what we call parting from negative actions, or sometimes translated as confession. So for us to stay with guilt, and that's where the modern person has a big problem, because they're being told don't feel guilty. And so you will feel guilty because inevitably, due to our sort of normal disposition, we do things that are not particularly helpful. And then we're also being told, no, you shouldn't feel guilty, if it's done, just let it go, whatever, So that's where, without really the method of confession or parting from negative actions, as we do it all across the line in all aspects of Buddhism, then we're stuck with guilt. And that's where guilt is something we really don't want to drag around. So that's a really negative situation. We need to get rid of that. Original sin, that's a doctrinal idea. And that means that we are basically tainted. So that's the exact opposite of what we in the Buddhist tradition would talk to about as Buddha nature. That however confused samsara is, and however you could say persistent the perception of samsara is, it actually has no origin. It has no truth. Whereas original sin is seen as an absolute. We are tainted. Yeah. Bad karma, there's the actions that we do that create suffering, discomfort. So bad karma is when we do something. For example, we steal something. What happens when we steal something is that we think, oh, I need that, I want that, I don't have it and I want it. And without being given it, we appropriate it. And that perpetuates a strong sense of, even though we know that this is going to maybe could bring problems, we're so stuck in this sense of poverty that we need to appropriate it. So that perpetuates. That's where we perpetuate a particular pattern. And it's not just, bad karma is not just something that has to do with something that might happen in the future, in terms of we can't see the result. We can actually already see the result when we are pregnant with that particular way we are constructing ourselves. When we steal, then we are pregnant with poverty. We're perpetuating our own experience, and we're constructing ourselves as poor persons. Similarly, also anger. When we get anger at others, we're perpetuating a perception of others as being negative and ourselves as being opposed to them, and that sort of solidifies. So that's why we can say these kind of actions that we do, they create negative circumstances. You could say they dig a particular, they create a particular and perpetuate a particular experience. It is so simple, but so hard to do off the cushion. That's right. That's why His Holiness says we need mindfulness and attentiveness. But the more there's a determination to do that, the more we're able to, and that's why we were talking about these factors, the aspiration, the steadfastness, something else, and then the joy, right? That it's something we really can see the value of. I'm wondering how an insect can attain enlightenment. Is it when its karma as an insect is exhausted and it can have a human rebirth? What we mean when we say that is just that an insect has Buddha nature. So that's all. And that's, you're right. It does require then to have a set of conditions there to then be reborn in a different body. But the principle, what is really meant by that when we say these things in Buddhism, it really just means that this individual possesses Buddha nature. If I meet with an aggressive person calmly and I act in accordance with this, at the least, I don't get dragged back down to the level of aggression again. This week's experiential lesson for myself. That's right. Yeah. And the thing is also we need, that's really good, of course. Then we first of all, we don't get carried away. We get sucked into the madness, right? But the other thing is also, and that's where where we do a lot of analysis, and we did that in the patience chapter, where we begin to actually shift our attention, and we would say, yeah, there's an aggressive person there, but what is it really that bugs us? Yes, there's the actions, but it's not the person, it's what's behind the person, right? And the more that we can recognize that the aggressive person actually isn't an inherent, it doesn't exist. They're actually, the only thing that's happening there is an ignorance that's perpetuated both on the part of the aggressive person and also in the terms of our perception. So the more we can challenge our perceptions, we can see there's a big difference between when we perceive aggression when we're in a good mood, where we can kind of dodge it, or when we're really run down and then it really overwhelms us. So there we can see it's not really about the other. It's also a lot to do with our own reception of it. And also the aggressive person. Is the aggressive person really evil? No. It's just that that person is driven by ignorance. So there's a basic, the real agent behind it is not the person doing aggressive acts. The real agent is the fundamental ignorance. That's why we could never say, oh, I don't like this person because of this, that, and the other. Well, that has nothing to do with the actual person. The person is just driven. The real story about that person, the real story about sentient beings is that they actually are innocent. They don't know what they're doing. And especially us who are studying this, we should know better. We should profoundly recognize how there's a purity in all beings at all places. So that's not as difficult as we think. It's even sort of basic to the hippie jargon of make love, not war, because somebody on some acid trip all of a sudden maybe had a glimpse of, oh yeah, people are actually innately pure, and then that sort of caught on. And there is a place where we understand that it's never going to work with war. It's never going to work with perpetuating these positions of antagonistic positions. So if we have a weak body that requires the sleep, should we fight that or work around it? Please work around it. Don't fight it. When you get a moment, please send. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Jakob. Dedicating the merit. Have to go. All right. Person has left. Okay. What time do we have? Okay, it's coming up to the hour. Okay. No more questions? We're all good? Okay. All Bodhisattvas here at the pit stop, ready to get back in track. Okay. Oh. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy Gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So, thank you.